Good.
All right, well, welcome. Welcome to the Maine Tree Farm Program Sustainability Standards Spotlight Series. Today we're going to focus on standards 5 and 7. My name is Andy Shultz. I'm a tree farm inspecting forester. I'm a member of the Maine Tree Farm Board and the Kennebec County Chair of the Maine Tree Farm Program. We have a couple of guest presenters today, Kelly McNutt from the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and Aaron Bergdahl from the Maine Forest Service. They will introduce themselves more fully when they come on. Just to be certain everyone's seeing the next slide.
Correct.
Yes, good.
Right.
Okay, so just a little background for me. I've worked with hundreds, literally hundreds of family woodland owners over a career of nearly 50 years. Most of the woodlot owners I know, they don't own their land or they don't keep their land in woods because of any standards or even because they have a tree farm sign necessarily. They love their land. They have a variety of reasons that each one is unique to the place and the person or the family. I often ask folks, what are your goals for your woods? And the most common answer I get is, I want to do the right thing. And then they might follow it by something a little more specific, like I want to do the right thing for wildlife, or I want to go out there and be able to enjoy my land. So if this describes you, your relationship with your woodlot, then if you're not already a tree farmer, you probably could be or should be. But just to put a little context behind what we're going to talk about today, this is where I think most tree farmers start, is a love of their land. So just a little bit about the American Tree Farm System. It is a program of the American Forest Foundation. This program is over 80 years old and counting. The tree farm sign, you've likely seen it around the state or around the country, really, indicating that this landowner is a member of the tree farm program. This sign is often referred to as the sign of good forestry. Now, the standards, as I mentioned, or I should have mentioned, hold on, I may have missed the slide. Nope, sorry about that. Okay, just to mention, there are 8 standards that provide a good foundation for everything that you might be doing with your woods. The first standard we're going to look at, standard 5, as you can see, fish, wildlife, biodiversity, and forest health. That covers, that's a pretty broad range of subjects. This standard sort of supports the wildlife side of the tree farm sign. If you notice, there's those 4 words along the sign. And it helps by addressing the range of conditions that can affect habitats in the woods. So a little more detail on the standard. Tree farmers will take steps to find out if their woods are home to any protected species of wildlife or habitats. And of course, they follow all the laws that go with that. One way to find out if you have any of these species on your land would be to check some websites. Another way is to work with trained professionals, foresters, wildlife biologists, etc., who can assess your property for you or do the checks. One spot where you can check on things is the Maine Natural Areas Program, which I show their website, one of their web pages in the slide. And another is that beginning with habitat, which is on the inland fish and wildlife side of things. And so I think that is my segue. Whoops. Yeah, that's my segue to Kelly McNutt from the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I'm going to stop sharing and let her take it over.
Hi guys, let me just share my screen real quick. All right, how's that? Can you see everything fine? All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is how to manage for wildlife on your land. Again, my name is Kelly McNutt. I am a private lands biologist and I work for the state of Maine in the inland fisheries and wildlife, and then within the beginning with habitat section. So let's see if I can get this. There we go. So what we're going to cover today is what is wildlife, what is habitat, and then what are three questions that you can ask yourself if you're trying to start managing for wildlife on your land, and then finally how you can manage for diversity. So what is wildlife? Wildlife are all of the non-domesticated animal species that occur in a landscape. So in Maine, we have a lot. As you can see, there are 17 reptiles, we've got 18 amphibians, 39 different fish. These are freshwater fish, 61 different mammals, 423 birds, and then by and large, the largest amount of animals that we have are going to be our invertebrates. We actually have 15,000 different types of invertebrates in Maine. And then of these, less than 100 are actually harvested for either hunting or fishing. And then in the United States, we hold wildlife in the public trust. What that basically means is wildlife belongs to everyone, whether you live in the country and you've got acreage or whether you're in the city, it's wildlife still belongs to every single person. And then in Maine, we're actually 94% privately owned, which means that 94% of wildlife habitat is on private land. So, habitat. What is habitat? Habitat is food, water, shelter, space, everything an animal needs to be able to survive. And then in this picture here, in theory, we should have all of the habitat requirements fulfilled because we should have all of the food, water, shelter, space in this picture. So food can be divided into a couple of different sections, and it's going to look different depending on what species you're managing for, but there's a couple of key components that you can promote that are going to benefit a really wide range of species. So the first thing is mast. Mast is going to be either hard mast like seeds, nuts, or soft mast, which is going to be more of your berries and fruiting plants. So in Maine, we've got two main hard mast producers. Both of them are pictured over here. So we've got American beech and we also have white oak. Those are going to be the preferred hard mast species that we have in Maine. As far as soft mast, there is so many different species that we have that provide soft mast. Pictured, we've got a blueberry, and then below that is flowering dogwood. But we also have cranberry, serviceberry, raspberry, winterberry holly, and so many more. The next category of food would be considered browse. So browse can be herbaceous or it can be woody. So in the summer, wildlife prefer to eat the new leaves and the buds off of the top of the plants. They're more tender, they've got more nutrients, more moisture, whereas in the winter, once all those leaves go away and they're left with just the woody browse, that's when they're going to be leaning on that a little bit harder. So in Maine, herbaceous browse can include wildflowers like asters and goldenrods. Ferns are also another really important component of herbaceous browse. And then, of course, we've got native grasses and clovers. And then as far as woody browse, we've got shrubs, think nannyberry, even raspberry, blueberry, alder, and willow. Those are all really popular woody browse sources, as well as any of our sapling or seedling size trees like aspen and maples. They just basically have to be low enough that the wildlife can actually get to them. And then this picture that we have up here is a very important wildlife resource and one of the easier ones that we can have if we're harvesting. It's called a stump sprout. They're really valuable resources because unlike a full mature tree, one, they can reach the leaves, and two, unlike a sapling, this has got the entire root system that you would have for this entire mature tree. And instead of trying to feed 20 feet plus of tree, it's only feeding a couple of inches of the browse. And so that makes that browse really valuable because it's got more nutrients and it's easily and more readily available to wildlife. And then the last important wildlife food resource would be pollen. So pollen can be found from a variety of resources. And I think this is a good point to mention that one plant might be providing all three of these different resources for wildlife. So, a raspberry plant, for example, has pollen when it's producing the flowers. It's got soft mass when it's got the actual berries on it. And then in the winter, once the leaves and the berries have gone away, it's still a really nice source of woody browse. Even some of our larger trees, like oaks, they might be wind pollinated, but they're hosts to over 500 different species of insect in the United States. So they're going to be benefiting our pollinators even without being a ready source of food for them. And this is why planting and promoting native plant species is so important, because a native plant is actually able to host more wildlife on it than the non native species. And then the next wildlife resource we need to promote is water. Water is one of the easiest and more complicated things at the same time. So it can come in many different forms. We've got a vernal pool to the left. These are seasonal shallow depressions that you'll find in your in the middle of the forest. And then to the right, we've got a brook. So brooks can also be seasonal, and that's why it's really important to get out onto your land, to walk it in the spring, summer, winter, and fall, so that you can see what resources you have, because some of them aren't around 365 days a year. And then shelter and cover is another really essential source for wildlife. And it's one that we can kind of take for granted, because you can go in the forest and you can see lots of trees and you can say, that's good enough. We've got the trees, that's cover. But if you're a moose or if you're a salamander, cover is going to be pretty different. There's a big size difference, different habitat needs. So, a good rule of thumb is to promote a really nice, messy, complex forest structure. Mess is always best for wildlife. Now, as humans, we like to tidy things up. And so, oftentimes, if you're building trails or maintaining existing trails, you're going to be really tempted to take all that brush and put it in a pile in your yard and burn it. What I recommend doing is, instead of burning that, because you're going to be removing that resource, go ahead and pile it up. We've got a nice brush pile here, and you can either leave that on the just exactly where it's most convenient, right on the side of the trail. You can put it on field edges. Just leave that resource around, because in the summer and in the winter, it's going to be providing a lot of really good cover for wildlife. And you're also going to want to encourage leaf litter, fine woody material, nice big fallen trees like this one. This is a very interesting one, because as you can see, we've got a blaze on it. So that's just a spray paint that someone went. So in this case, a landowner actually was going to have a harvest on their property, and they had this tree that was already existing, fallen on the ground. They wanted to maintain it for a wildlife resource. So they went ahead and they marked that tree to keep. So the foresters knew when they came onto the property, hey, yeah, there's this fallen log, don't move it. Just leave it be, leave it on the ground. We want to keep it there for wildlife. And so it's something that you're able to do yourself. You're able to go through and mark what trees you want to keep. And then, of course, we've got snags. Snags are standing dead trees, or sometimes even living trees that have cavities in them. So you can either have a natural snag, or you can also have artificial nest boxes, things like that. But these are going to be really important, because we have a lot of cavity nesting species in this state. And so they're going to be limited by how many snags that they have. And then the last thing that wildlife need, the last component, is going to be space. Space can be a little bit hard to manage for, because if, once you purchase your land, you might not be able to buy more. That's fine. So for things like moose, they might need thousands of acres of space, whereas mice, they might only need an acre. It's often a limiting factor, but it's important that you don't have to just manage your own property. You can kind of zoom out and see what's going on around you. Don't forget, just because you might not have thousands of acres in order to support a bull moose for his entire lifespan doesn't mean you won't have moose on your property. Your property can provide a really important resource to those moose still. So you might be able to provide their bedroom or their grocery store, places that they're not going to be visiting they're not going to be spending their entire day there, but they're going to still be valuable. They're still going to be on your property, and you're still going to be contributing to their success. So don't get too hung up about the size of your property. Focus more on about what resources you have and how you can enhance those. So you've got all this information. You know what wildlife is. You know what habitat is. Now, in order to start actually managing for wildlife, we've got a couple questions that I always say to ask yourself. First, where are you? Next, what do you have? And then, what are your goals? So, where are you? This is a very easy question and also complicated. You know your address, you know where you are, you know how to get there, but it's also important to know where are you in the state. So, beginning with Habitat, which is the team that I'm on, has a map viewer that you can go to. We've got the link down here. You can go ahead and follow that. And then it's going to look like this when you pull it up. You can type in your address. I did it with mine. I do live in downtown Augusta, so my wildlife species are going to be a little bit less exciting than what you guys might have. But even though I'm in the middle of the city, you can see on this map, I do have quite a few wildlife resources. So we've got some riparian habitat here. We've got some conserved land here. We've got an endangered species that's living over here. And these are all only within a couple of miles from my house. And this is free to do. You can do it for your own land. It'll generate this really nice report, and then you can see what's going on near you. And that helps you be more informed about how to manage and what goals you should have. So, what do you have? This is when, again, it's really important to get boots on the ground, going out into your property in every season. I like to use eBird. I like to keep lists of what wildlife I've observed, where I've observed them, maybe what they're doing. This is fun. It should be fun. It should be a cool game that you can play with yourself to figure out what's happening on your land. Trail cameras are another really great resource, but I personally just think it's most valuable if you can get out there yourself. And then you can, while you're walking around, keep an eye out for what different ecosystems you have. What parts of the habitat do you already have? Do you have water? Do you have these snags on your property? And then again, you can refer back to that beginning with habitat viewer, and you can check for any resources that are already mapped in the state that are existing around your property. And then finally, what are your goals? These can be really complex or they can be very simple. You might just in general want to promote diversity, or you might say, gosh, I really like pine marten. I want pine marten on my land. And so you can focus on species specific management. You might have unique ecosystems that don't exist very many places and you want to protect that. You might want to have a forestry operation and have a profit made from that while also still benefiting wildlife. Or you also might just say, hey, I think my land is really great. I would like to improve public access for it as well. So the final thing is just managing for diversity. And we won't get into too much of the nitty gritty of it because it can be really complicated. And as you can see from this quote, if you put two foresters in a room and ask them a question, you'll get at least 3 different answers. So managing for diversity, it's going to be something that can be individualized to your exact property. But in general, we have a couple of things that we try to keep our eyes open for. So as you can see, we've got these great graphics here. On the left, we've got a very simple forest structure, and on the right, we have a more complex forest structure. So one of these is going to be much more diverse. So in the simple forest structure, obviously these are going to be less diverse. As you can see, there's not very many varieties of tree species. We have only 2 different ages. We've got these really short, younger trees, and then we've got these tall, older trees, but barely anything in between and barely anything in the understory underneath these older, mature trees. These simple forest structures are really vulnerable to disturbance. So things like disease or climate change or natural disasters can come through, and say these are all pines and a pine weevil comes through, you might have no trees left. Whereas on the right side, this complex forest structure, it's going to be more diverse, it's less vulnerable to disturbance, and you can actually support more wildlife for it. And as you can see, we've got a whole host of different plant and tree species. So having multi-aged or complex forest structures, like I said, they do build resiliency. They increase the carrying capacity or the number of wildlife that you can have on your property. And they also really maximize the cover and food that you have in a set space. So oftentimes you can't expand your land outwards. You might have neighbors that are not willing to sell. You might only have a couple of acres to work with. So how do you improve that space? Build up. Think about it like an apartment complex in the city. If you build upwards and have more diversity and more structure in your forest, you're going to improve and have more wildlife on it. And then by doing this, what you're actually going to be doing is kind of promoting or retaining these old growth characteristics that are so desirable to wildlife and so fun to be able to tell your neighbors that you've got this old growth type forest on your land. And it also helps diversify the species and age classes you have. We have a lot of resources for landowners in the state. So, like I said, I'm with Beginning with Habitat. My role is people will invite me over to their land. I will walk it and I will help assess what habitat resources they have on their property. And I can then help work with the landowner to go over what their goals might be, how they can achieve those, and in some cases, even offer recommendations for different financial assistance. So we also have Maine Forest Service, Maine Audubon, NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They have a lot of incentive programs. And then, of course, your local soil and water conservation districts. So, you guys have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me at Beginning with Habitat, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions and come out and visit your land if you need me to. And I will stop sharing.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Let's hand it off to Aaron. Aaron Bergdahl.
All right, I'm here. Can you all see my presentation, or are you seeing presenter mode again?
Presenter mode.
Okay. How about that?
One more button. There
All
you
right.
go.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Bergdahl. I'm a forest pathologist with the Maine Forest Service, so I focus on tree diseases. I'm going to talk to you about tree farm forest health today. So I am part of the Forest Health and Monitoring Division with the Maine Forest Service, and we provide technical assistance, education, and training. We advise and give perspective on issues related to forest health, and we also survey and monitor forest health conditions throughout the state. Today, my presentation is going to focus on residual stand damage and the impacts of that, and examples of forest health issues to monitor on your land. And there's a list of the things that I'm going to cover briefly. So first, impacts of forest management on the residual stand. So wounding is not a very common occurrence in undisturbed stands, but when wounding happens, it exposes trees to decay fungi that can make them, and also can make them attractive to insects. And what you get down the line is wounded trees that have rot in them, and some qualities that essentially represent no economic value down the line. But that, like what Kelly says, this only really applies to if you are managing for economic return. If you this is much less important if you are managing for wildlife and you really want to have cavity trees with cavities and so forth. But I'm just talking today about things that happen during forest management activities. And many of these wounds that happen during forest management activities, they're human caused and not natural, which is the topic here. So all trees are vulnerable to soil disturbance, soil compaction, mechanical damage, site changes that occurred due to harvesting. So this can also influence nutrient availability, when you change soil moisture and oxygen levels due to compaction. So also removal of trees influences soil temperatures, which can change moisture in the soil and can change habitats in a way that stresses trees. Also changes in how water flows through a stand can happen due to forestry or management activities. And sapling and pole stages of trees, so the smaller diameter trees, typically younger trees, are more vulnerable to damage because they have thinner bark, so they have proportionally larger wounds. They have a longer time to develop the discoloration and decay that cause losses in economic value. This is a good time to mention that tree mortality is a process. It's not an event. A lot of people say that my tree was alive yesterday and now it's dead, but usually there's a more involved story there. So usually it starts with predisposing factors, which can be things like soil compaction, poor soil drainage. Again, that might be related to management activities in a stand. Also poor fertility. These things can also lead to, or mortality can be contributed to with inciting factors as well. Things like mechanical injuries, or even that are caused by machinery or humans, or even natural ones like frost cracks. Defoliating insects are also inciting factors, but usually the things that, the final nail in the coffin for trees, so to speak, come along after this process has happened. So the things that finish off trees are usually insects and diseases. So when trees are damaged, the decay organisms enter through those wounds, and that can cause staining in itself. They're all, physiological reactions that cause staining. Sometimes insects are attracted to wounds, and they can bring with them fungi that cause staining, and also just the fungi themselves, once they colonize, can cause staining as well. So, and rot never sleeps, so to speak. It slows down quite a bit in the winter, but internal decay can advance at a rate of up to 10 inches in, in the higher end of things. So, if you have a wound and a fungus is able to enter that wound and start the decay process, you extrapolate that over a number of years, and you can have quite a large decay column and have the end result of lower value wood. So here are some symptoms and signs of decay. As you can see on the left, there's a punky heart rot that has impacted this tree, this birch tree. And then you see on the right, we sawed this tree in half just to show the decay column, the severity of staining. There's probably a couple fungi present there. But then you can see here, if you can see my cursor, this is a decay conch, or a kind of mushroom. This is it's a sterile mushroom, but that does not produce spores. But this is an indication on the outside of the tree that there's rot occurring on the inside of tree. So there's my animated arrow. So here in this picture, you can see an artist conch, which is a pretty common rot fungus of hardwood trees. They produce a lot of spores. Excuse me. This artist conch can produce about 350,000 spores per second. So if you extrapolate that over an hour or a day or a couple days of wet weather, when fungi usually are actively producing spores for infections, there's a lot of spores of a lot of different species of decay fungi all throughout the forest environment. But again, there needs to be some way for that fungal spore to get into the wood, and usually typically that's through natural openings or wounds. So when you see a decay conch or one of these mushrooms on the outside of a tree, you know that rot is fairly well advanced, because the fungus needs to gather up a lot of resources before it can go into that reproductive stage and produce these massive amounts of spores. And usually when you see a decay conch, there's decay pretty much uniformly above and below, kind of in a columnar type shape. So here are a couple common decay fungi, indications again that you have advanced rot, because you're seeing these fungal fruiting structures or conchs or mushrooms on the outside of these trees. So you have on the left brown root and butt rot, and on the right red ring rot. Here's one called Heterobasidium anosum, or anosis root rot. Interesting names there, but this is one that primarily affects red pine. Other conifers are also susceptible, but red pine's the one that it's red pine is most susceptible. So if you have red pine on your property, and you see pockets of trees that are dying for perhaps an unexplained reason, this fungus might be there. This is the one that if you cut your trees during the summer, you need to treat your stumps with borax to make sure that you don't kind of get more establishment of this pretty destructive fungus in your trees. Here's one called shoestring rot, or armillaria root disease. Comes in three phases. Here's the pathogenic phase, where it's this white fungal tissue is active under the bark, parasitizing the vascular system, which is transporting nutrients, water up and down the stem. And Here we have a resting state or a rotting state. This is where the fungus gets its common name of shoestring rot. You have these black, they're called rhizomorphs, and they look like flat black shoestrings. And here's the reproductive stage over here, the honey mushrooms or bunches of mushrooms that grow at the base of trees, indicating that armillaria root disease is present. So ways to limit stand damage is to limit stand entries. The fewer times you go into your woodlot for management, the lesser chance that you're going to be damaging trees. Mark skid roads prior to harvest and stick to them. The more roads and side roads you have, the more stand damage there is. And I'll tell you a little quick story about the lower left here. This is an area that was trying to be converted to a sugar bush, and they had so many skid roads, and when they were removing all the other species, that they damaged so many of these trees, and as a result, you didn't really get the sugar bush that they hoped for, because you just had a lot of trees with disease and stress. They weren't going to be great producing trees. Also consider time of year and soil conditions to minimize things like compaction and just compaction and changing how water moves through the stand. So skidding out larger stems has a higher potential for causing damage than smaller stems, and transporting heavier loads has a higher potential for causing damage than lighter loads. And some equipment is less impactful than others. So choose your equipment, and maybe more importantly, your operators wisely. So it's human beings at this time that control this equipment. So you want to make sure that you have some references, and you look at prior work done by a harvester to make sure that they're conscientious of not damaging the residual stand. So now I'm going to talk about some tree diseases and insects of current concern. And I'm just going to reiterate what Kelly said about scouting your woodlots in every season, because you see different things at different times of the year that will cue you into what's happening in terms of forest health in your woodlot. So keep an eye out for what is not normal, and reach out to independent resources like Maine Forest Service for information and advice. First one I'm going to talk about here is oak wilt. Not currently found in Maine, but when it does get here, and it will get here, it's going to have major impacts on our forests. First found in Wisconsin, or described in Wisconsin in 1944. It's a vascular wilt fungus spread by insects. It's much like Dutch elm disease, but it causes wilting and defoliation much more quickly and can kill a tree within a month, whereas Dutch elm disease takes a year to a year and a half before it fully kills a tree. The most susceptible species, the ones that you want to look for that are displaying symptoms, are red oak group oaks. They're the northern red oak, pin oak, black oak, scarlet oak. Those are trees that will be killed within a month of infection. The white oak group oaks, like swamp white, northern white, bur oak, chestnut oak, chinkapin, those are gonna sort of harbor the disease longer, but they'll decline over a longer period of time. So kind of a reservoir for disease. So the take-home message of what to look for oak wilt is pockets of dead trees that are unexplainable. Oak trees specifically, because that's the host of the oak wilt. And most importantly is when you see an oak tree defoliating in the summer and you see wilted branches, wilted leaves, discolored leaves, that's a time when we really encourage you to call us. We'll send somebody out and just make sure that it's not oak wilt, because that's one thing we really want to catch early so that we can manage it sufficiently. So general oak wilt precautions are: do not prune your oak trees during the growing season. We say May through September here in Maine, and that's because the fresh wounds attract insects that spread the fungus, transport the spores from fungal fruiting structure to the wounds. So, and if you must prune, let's say you have a broken branch and you really want to prune it for the better health of the tree, use a pruning sealer to protect that wound from insect encounter. And just keep an eye out for oaks in your areas. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is white pine needle damage, which is a complex of diseases that show symptoms early in the summer, and that's yellowing of the crown and premature defoliation of needles. We're used to seeing a natural situation where in the fall, pine trees will cull their oldest needles, and you see needles accumulating on roads and driveways and on your car and so forth. When you see this in June, that's an indication that you have white pine needle damage in your stand. This is a chronic stressor that kind of causes a reduction in crown and a reduction in growth. There's nothing that can be done to really manage that, but it's good to know what you have on your woodlot. Emerald ash borer is another one that's been spreading fairly rapidly as of late. Something that you can look for, especially in winter, is this blonding or flecking of bark that you see on this ash tree on the left. And that's done by woodpeckers. And those woodpeckers are trying to get at the grubs of emerald ash borer that are under the bark. Sometimes the woodpeckers are foraging for native insects, but when you see really aggressive foraging, that's an indication there's a high level or population of grubs in the wood. And you want us to come and look at this a little bit further. You can see on the right, the red dots indicate areas already infested with emerald ash borer. The blue areas are quarantine areas. So if you're in any of these areas that are colored, you could encounter emerald ash borer. So keep an eye out for that. Hemlock woolly adelgid has been spreading from coastal areas inland for quite a few years now. The insects feed on tree sap. They're non-native. It's a non-native insect, so there's few predators that are present to control population. There are some non-native insects that are biocontrol agents that you can perhaps get access to either through private sources or through contacting Maine Forest Service. Perhaps to see if you can get a release of these predator beetles or other biological control agents on your property. But anyway, hemlock woolly adelgid chronically stresses hemlock trees and can lead to death over time. So best way to prevent spread is don't work in hemlocks mated July. Don't transport hemlock plant material outside of quarantine areas. These crawlers you can see in relation to this penny here, they're so small, they can get on clothing, they can get on all sorts of different materials, and they can be transported from infested areas to non-infested areas quite easily. So it's good to take as many precautions as possible to prevent this from moving to your woodlot or from your woodlot to other woodlots. Here is pretty much the same information with the quarantine map for hemlock woolly adelgid. So if you're in this area, you could be experiencing hemlock woolly adelgid, this blue area. So keep an eye out for, again, this whitish little flocculence on the bottom, or it's kind of like woolly, hence the name, but this is a waxy coating that covers the insects, and this is a really good thing to see. You're not going to see these tiny little crawlers, are just way too small, but once these crawlers get established and start feeding and producing this waxy substance, that's when you're going to be able to identify HWA. And again, Maine Forest Service can help you with that. Beech leaf disease is the last thing I'm going to talk about. This is traveling quite fast throughout Maine. I think there's 400 towns around that are in all counties have at least one town that where beech leaf disease is found. It came to the United States, or was first described in Ohio in 2012. It's caused by a microscopic roundworm, an incredibly small plant parasitic nematode. This nematode causes this beech leaf disease that affects all American beech trees, and most beech cultivars are very susceptible as well. This disease will kill seedlings and saplings first and will cause crown dieback and mortality within around 7 years. But we're still trying to get an idea for how fast this all goes here in Maine, because this is a very relatively new disease that we found in Maine first time in 2021. Here's where beech leaf disease is in the country. As you can see, all 16 Maine counties are infested, and here on the right you can see all the towns that we've been monitoring and finding beech leaf disease in. So here's what a healthy American beech leaf looks like. Here's what you might see when you're scouting in your woodlot. You may see, like here on the right, you can see these dark bands in the middle of veins, and they're very pretty consistent bands. You can also see these in the winter on the leaves that are persisting on beech trees, so keep an eye out for these bands. In the summer you might also see thicker, kind of leathery or deformed leaves. Could be an indication that you have beech leaf disease on your land. Also, when a stand of beech trees is infected by beech leaf disease, you can see right through it. If this was a healthy beech stand, you wouldn't be able to see clear across. You wouldn't be able to see, 10 yards, it would just be a wall of green foliage. But because this is an infected stand, there's a lot of dead buds, deformed leaves, defoliation that leads to this different situation. And here's a picture of the culprit itself, the beech leaf disease nematode that we took in the lab here with some of our equipment. And to give you an idea about size, here on the right is a spider mite. That spider mite is about 5 times the tip of a ballpoint pen. You could fit about 5 spider mites on the tip of a ballpoint pen, and here's your nematode, very small. It's not just one nematode, it's billions of nematodes, hundreds of thousands of nematodes in even a single leaf that cause a lot of structural damage and cause the problems that lead to disease in beech. So if you have, now I'm going to talk about a little bit different in this closing slide. I'm going to talk about a different disease. So you can see here on the left, this is a tree that has beech bark disease. So this is a fungal canker disease that affects beech trees, and it causes all this callus tissue and scarring, these pock marks indicating the disease. Some trees are very resistant to this, and those resistant trees look like this on the right. So what we're hoping to do with Maine Forest Service is trial some new treatments for beech leaf disease to protect these trees on the right. So if you have trees that look nice and smooth, beech trees that look nice and smooth, like the ones here on the right, let us know. We don't want the scabby pockmarked ones. We want the smooth ones. We might be able to incorporate some trees on your land into a trial to protect this rare genetic phenomenon of beech bark disease resistant trees, in the hopes that once we find a solution once science finds a solution to beech leaf disease, that we can maybe reintroduce these smooth bark beech bark disease resistant trees. I know that's kind of confusing, but due to the similarity of the names, but I hope that was clear enough. So again, if you have any forest health concerns, please reach out to the Maine Forest Service Forest Health and Monitoring. We have an online form that you can upload pictures to, and it goes directly to our office and gets distributed to either an entomologist, somebody who studies more or deals more with the insect side of things, or to me, that deals with more of the fungi, bacteria, viruses, and environmental issues that impact trees. You can email us at foresthealth@maine.gov or call the number there. And I will I'll answer any questions you've got. If you could just hold those to the end of the presentation or reach out to me in person. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, as you said, we'll have plenty of time for questions. I am going to wrap things up with a few more slides. So let me just go back to sharing my screen. And let's see. I think I'm going to, if you'll bear with me, going to have to do something. And now back to Zoom, share. Okay, are folks just seeing the slide?
Correct.
So we're good. Okay. Move up to. So the next standard, the other standard we'll be looking at today is Standard 7 about protecting special sites. You can see here that there are a number of sort of categories of specialness. It can be ecological, biological, historical, etc. In tree farmers, in following the standards, will make good faith efforts to find out if there's any sites already identified on their land. We'll talk in a second about how to find out. Also, landowners are encouraged to designate their own special sites. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, in many cases, that's more important to a landowner than something that's on a list somewhere. So once you have identified special sites, to follow the standard would be to make reasonable efforts to protect them, to sort of build them into your plans, depending on the scale and intensity of your management activities. It might be as easy as just, you know, telling a logger not to go over into that part of the woods, or it may affect the tree selection. Here's some examples of special sites. One, which sort of echoes something Kelly said. This is a vernal pool, zoomed in to see some eggs, which I believe are wood frog eggs. I could be wrong, but that's kind of why vernal pools are special, because they're breeding places. It's pretty easy to protect those. There's a set of voluntary guidelines you can see, or you can simply keep your equipment out of the vernal pool. That's the basic thing. Also leave some tree shade around it so that it doesn't dry up faster than it would normally in the spring. On the right, you see a sign commemorating an old settlement. There's some in that area. There's some stone walls. There's some cellar holes, some pretty interesting cellar holes. And the entire area has been harvested through many, many times, but it's pretty easy in this case, again, to keep the cellar holes intact. In fact, most folks driving skidders or logging equipment would prefer not to drive into a cellar hole anyway, because it can be hard to get out. But the key is that the landowner's aware. They actually have a sign commemorating it, so other folks know about it too. Some places to look. We've got the Maine Historic Preservation Commission. That's our own in-state state historical agency. They have a website. If you send them a map, they'll send rather a location map. They can let you know if there's anything in their database, anything in their records that may have occurred on or near your property. In the past, I've been able to get maps from the late 1800s that show where there was somebody's house, which might lead you to find a cellar hole or some indication of that settlement. You can also check with the National Register of Historic Places. Um, Many of these things don't come with any regulatory, uh, uh, you know, encumbrance or anything like that. But it's good to know about these. And as I said, under the standard, we encourage landowners to recognize and protect these sites. The picture on the right is something where this landowner, who, by the way, was an outstanding tree farmer one year, this is on the Pine Tree Camp in Rome. They had some work done on the camp to put a bridge over a stream, and felt strongly enough to want to dedicate that bridge and put up a plaque. So this is what we mean most of the time by special places. Now, under this standard, there is a provision to recognize something called forests of recognized importance, or FORI. The short answer is we don't have any of these in Maine. What they are, they're forests that have some sort of global or regional significance. Uh, One example of that would be the watershed for a major urban area. But when the the Maine Tree Farm folks looked into this a number of years ago, they found that even Portland didn't make the cut as a um, major urban forest area. So it's okay with me. Doesn't mean that you're not actually protecting that watershed. There's a lot of good work going on in that regard, but it does not qualify as this FORI situation. So don't need to worry about it. And there's a statement to that effect that you can incorporate into whatever your management plan or documentation if you are in the tree farm program. So getting back to these sort of landowner designated special sites or places, here's some interesting pictures. One was sort of an engraved rock with a date on it, and that goes back to when that part of the state had a lot of quarries in it, which are themselves kind of special in a way. They're well over 100 years old, getting close to 200 years old. And somebody thought to engrave that rock, so that makes that rock a little bit special. Then, of course, there's the spot where Granddad last parked his truck. Um, you may have something like this on your woodlot, and you may think of it as trash, or you might think of it as a special place. And then there are other ecological features, such as what we call a legacy tree. This is a big old sugar maple that's just a few steps away from a recreational trail. It's part of the story of that woods. It tells you that once upon a time that tree grew out in the open. That's why its crown is so big. But now another forest, a second growth is coming up around it. So again, that can be your special place. And that's pretty much it. I'll say thank you for joining us here. I'll leave